Hello!
Hello iOS fans!
It's the agents of Underworlds.
And in this video, we're going to be talking tier lists.
We figured there were enough Rivals decks out there now that we could do a little tier list of them, put them in a little bit of a ranking for people out there who are wondering what's the best one to take right now.
Absolutely, although I should say that this video is for Nemesis pairings rather than Rivals pairings, so this is not a Rivals just taking the deck on its own, but having been to the big Grand Clash tournament and looked at some tournament data and whatever, we've come up with a rough tier list. Now it's not a very big tier list because there's only sort of 6 or 7 to choose from, but we've come up with a rough tier list of the strongest decks out there right now.
So before we get into the tier list itself, we wanted to just put a special mention in there for Edge of the Knife, because it's quite new and it obviously hasn't featured in any major tournaments as yet.
Absolutely, I've literally never played with it, so I can't really comment on it. So, I mean, your feeling is that it's not that good?
Unfortunately, I think because it's got a plot card and you can only take one plot card Rivals deck in your selection, I just don't think it's the best choice out there right now.
Right, okay, so it's going to elevate those Horde warbands, but perhaps not enough to outlast things like Pillage and Plunder or Countdown to Cataclysm, which we'll come on to in a minute. The worst, we think, of the Rivals decks for Nemesis, and the data bears out, is Rack and Ruin.
It's got some nice cards, but there aren't enough, and it just doesn't have a really cohesive set of end phase or surge cards to make it a better choice over anything else.
No, there are certain edge case builds, I think, where it's quite good. I played a really good Ephelim's Pandemonium deck with it at the Grand Clash, and they edged it against the Jaws, but I'm not a top player. But it was obviously played really well, and the person who knew what they were doing it, and I know that Martin is one of our supporters, he plays it as well, and he's very tactically astute. So I think if you're at the top of the game, then you can probably get something out of it.
Yeah.
But for ease of access and for reliable results with a whole load of warbands, I think it's at the bottom.
I do feel with certain warbands like Ephelim's and with the Dread Pageant, where they want to be spreading wounds around and have other abilities to help back up that damage spread, it's a little bit better. But there are a lot of warbands out there that just don't care at all about that kind of thing, and therefore just are never going to favour it. In at number 5 is Reckless Fury.
Now this was probably going to be close to top tier before they nerfed it.
It was all over the top of Worlds when Worlds happened last year. That was before any of the nerfs came in, and it was absolutely broken.
Absolutely, and I do think a little bit of that was that the aggro meta was very easy to pick up really quickly. So Worlds was like almost immediately before the game had come out. I think it was for the people taking that, good players, they could say, this is really strong, I can use this really well. So I think that skewed the data even further that way, but Reckless Fury was quite clearly busted, and it's been pretty hardly kicked in the knackers.
Yeah, there are 4 cards on that list that you now cannot take in Nemesis format. They are called Forsaken cards, and when you look at them, even individually, they are just over-the-top cards, so it's no surprise that they got battered.
No, but having completely sort of ripped its heart out, it has then become a much harder deck to use. Because its objectives, they're quite specific. You need lots of everybody to have charged, or the surges all require, most of the things require you being in your opponent's half. So if your opponent ends up, if they come out late game, your opponent's in your half, then you're a bit screwed. So it kind of just, and it hasn't got the extra cards that give it the synergy that it needed because they've been removed from the deck.
Yeah, so that's why that's at the second bottom.
Number 4, and to be honest, 1, 2, 3 and 4 are pretty close together.
They are very close.
But number 4, we've gone for Emberstone Sentinels.
Emberstone Sentinels is a really nice solid deck. It's got some really good end phase cards in there, and it's got some really nice power cards and upgrades.
Yeah, it's funny. It's got 3 really good end phase cards and 3 really trash end phase cards.
Yeah,
but you can, if you're looking for a way to bump your glory up, it is a really good way of getting a high glory total objective deck. But I think it lacks accuracy buffs.
Yeah, it doesn't have enough of that, and also it's supposed to be like an objective holding deck, which you would think would favour more Horde warbands, but actually their biggest scoring end phase, which is Supremacy, is possibly easier to score with slightly more elite warbands that have fighters with a bounty of 2 or 3 on them, rather than your 1 bounty fighters.
Yeah, which I think does make the possibility of Blazing Assault and Emberstone Sentinels a good combination. But I think it just doesn't quite match up to the other combinations. I think it's pretty good on its own, but I think the other 3 are just even better.
I think, unlike the other decks, Emberstone Sentinels suffers a bit more late game if you don't get things like Supremacy out early enough to have enough fighters to be able to score it. I have had many games where my Supremacy
100%.
has been right in that bottom 3.
And Slow Advance is a 2 glory card that can be hard to score late game.
Yep.
In fact, it can be hard to score all game.
Early game as well.
It's worth 2, but it's a good card, but you can just be stymied on it, and then you've got that hand bricking problem that you get in the game sometimes.
Number 3 on our list, and very close to Emberstone Sentinels, is Pillage and Plunder.
Yeah, and I think this is in here because its objectives are so easy to score with certain warbands. Now, they're obviously the whole of this tier list. Not all rivals decks aren't equal to all warbands. So that has to be considered. But Pillage and Plunder, if you've got a decent number of fighters and you've got some resurrection abilities, then I think it's really, really good. And the best thing about it is that when you're trying to score your surges, they just lead into the end phase card. So you're doing the thing to score your surges, and meanwhile, at the end of the game or at the end of the round, I've scored this as well because I've been doing that. That's what I wanted to do.
And unlike Emberstone Sentinels, where you have to end the round standing on treasure tokens and things like that, with a lot of Pillage and Plunder, as long as you've flipped those at some point during the round, then you've scored it, and there's not a lot your opponent can do to stop a lot of them.
One small downside of it is that because of your flipping objectives, you're delving. Every time you delve, you stagger the fighter. So then people are getting re-rolls against you. But that's mitigated slightly by the fact that you're often into a cover hex because you flip it to cover hex. Although I did find, because I've been playing it a little bit recently, and I have found that actually sometimes, because you need to do like 3 times in a round or flip 3 different ones and they're already flipped over, so you need to flip them back, you're then staggered and not in a cover hex. Which so it can give your opponent an accuracy boost, which is something to be considered, but I just think you can just score the end phase objectives with abandon. Number 2, possibly equal with Pillage and Plunder to be honest, is Blazing Assault.
Blazing Assault is just nearly the perfect deck. It's got great power cards, it's got great upgrades, it's got loads of really great surges and end phase scoring cards as well, that a lot of them, all you've got to be doing is hitting people to score a lot of them, which you're going to do anyway. It's just got that one problem card. Yeah,
it has Annihilation in it, which is for 5 glory, but you can mitigate that by picking number 1 in the tier list, Countdown to Cataclysm, which we'll come on to. But I think if you were doing this only on its power cards, if this was a tier list of power cards, it would hands down win.
Yeah.
Because it's almost, for some builds, it's almost like, well, I've got 10 ploys and 8 upgrades from Blazing Assault, because most of them are that good.
Yeah. And as we said, with the objectives, you would take a lot of them. The only problem is you lose 5 glory from Annihilation, which nearly nobody ever takes.
Yeah, I think the rest are all 1.
Yeah.
So it's, you're going to have quite a low glory. So you are relying on your dice. It's got quite a lot of extra dice. It's got the most accuracy buffs of any of the decks. But it did do really well at the Warhammer Worlds. Val did use Blazing Assault to come second. If you're an aggro warband, there's absolutely no reason not to take it.
And at number 1, as already alluded by Robin, and probably already given away by the fact that we've covered all the others already, is Countdown to Cataclysm.
Now, it's interesting. I don't think this in itself is the best deck, but it's everybody's number 1 second choice.
It is the kingmaker of all secondary deck choices, whether you're going for Emberstone Sentinels, Pillage and Plunder, Blazing Assault. You pretty much always take Countdown to Cataclysm as your secondary deck.
And the main reason I would say is that it's got 4, 5 potentially unstoppable glory. I don't know if you potentially have unstoppable glory, but it's got the card Spread Havoc, which you almost always score for 2, in fact, and you guarantee to score it for 1.
Yeah, you've literally got to do nothing to score it for 1.
And you normally score it for 2. It's got Wreckers, which, unless something really weird happens with a Cataclysm token counter, you can almost always score that for 2. And it's got the Surge card, Collateral Damage, which basically is when a fighter dies, and you move your Cataclysm counter at 1 and you just score it.
If you're the underdog, you can do anything to move your Cataclysm counter along.
The World Champion, the World Champion, that will have a world, but anyway.
It also has a 2 glory card in there, which is there's at least 2 enemy fighters injured and one of them's taken out of action, which you can quite often score once you know you've got it in hand. It's just pile in on one person, and that's another 2 glory, which is almost unstoppable.
Yeah, it has got a lot of really handy cards, and it's got some nifty ping. And I believe it's got Utter Conviction as well, which is a really nice upgrade. So it hasn't got the best upgrade and power card suite, but it's got some solid cards in there, and if you pair it with any of the others, it doesn't matter that the power cards aren't that great, because certainly Sentinels and Blazing Assault has better power cards, so you just pick all the power cards from those decks, or most of the power cards from those decks.
I think the other thing is that if you were to pair Emberstone Sentinels and Pillage and Plunder together, you're like, oh, I want to stand on objectives, but I also want to flip them. Or if you take Blazing Assault with Pillage and Plunder, you're like, oh, I want to charge into my opponent's half and hit them and stand on objectives, but I also want to flip those objectives. Yeah. And a lot of the decks will sort of fight against each other to an extent, but Countdown to Cataclysm, it's just, whilst you're playing the game, you'll score glory from Countdown.
It has got a set explosives in it, which dovetails really nicely with Emberstone Sentinels, and not so well with Pillage and Plunder.
Yeah.
And the other thing I really like about it, it's got improvised attack, which is just a random
little
when you play
attack.
It. Sometimes it doesn't even matter whether it comes off, because if you're holding one of these ones where you just need to make an attack while you're on an objective, it's like literally bang, I've scored that. Thank you very much. It's got quite a lot of utility. I think it was picked in well over half the decks that Warhammer World Clash.
Yeah, massive amount.
Which shows how strong it is.
At the Bugman's night the day before, the top 10 places all had Countdown to Cataclysm with something else. And I think for that reason, because Countdown to Cataclysm right now is such an easy choice, that's why Edge of the Knife is always going to lose to it.
Because it's got a plot card, so you can't put it with Cataclysm. So
exactly.
That's what you're saying,
So I think right now, Countdown to Cataclysm does actually need a bit of a slap, needs to be brought down a peg or two to make it a little less the obvious choice, just to try and give some of the other decks and combinations a little bit more room.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts about that, but perhaps we'll put them in a whole different video. But let's not worry about different videos. Let us know what you think about this one.
Yes, do leave a comment below. What's your favourite combination of decks and warband?
Is our tier list absolute poppycock like Pete and I think most tier lists are?
Yeah, I can't say I like them really, but it seemed like an obvious video to make. And as always, don't forget to click that like button.
And click that subscribe button.
And ring that bell so you get notifications when we release new videos.
And if you would like to, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. We're going to be doing lots more battle reports over there in coming weeks and months.
So we'll see you soon, probably in the Embergard.